Hi everyone, this is Selena Kraus and welcome to another card video. In this video I'm featuring the LDRS Creative Puddle Jumper stamp set along with the hybrid inks. So we'll show you how to quickly create a watercolor rainbow background using the hybrid inks. So as I said, I'm using the Puddle Jumper stamp set. I'll be using this Big Sunshine stamp along with keeping pocket full of sentiment that will go right above the sunshine. So let's get started. I have my craft mat ready here. I have jar of water and my water brush, and I'm using a piece of watercolor paper. I'm using cold press watercolor paper. So I'm starting with Scarlet Rose and added some water, and then with the paintbrush I painted my strip right directly onto the watercolor paper. Next I use Pink Tutu, then Flash. Now I'm using some Dandelion for the yellow. And compared to the dye inks, the hybrid inks are a little less water reactive. However, as well their color, when you paint them, they're more muted than dye inks. So you get very soft and very subtle background. So after the dandelion, I use the key lime pine, and then blue Bali blue actually. Apologize. Next, I'm using the Lala lavender. After I did my strip, I realized it's pretty light, so I decided to go with the plum crazy. So I just smooshed some of the plum crazy ink onto my craft mat, and then I painted directly onto my watercolor paper. So now we are done creating that watercolor background. I'm just cleaning up my mat and putting it away. So next I wanted to make sure that my background is nice and dry, so I'm using my heat tool to speed up the process. You can just set this aside and let it naturally dry. But I was a little impatient and I wanted to finish my card, so I just used my heat tool. So as well, I want to make sure that it's nice and dry because we'll be doing some heat embossing. But before that, I'm trimming my background down to 5 1/4 by 4 inches. And then I'll be using my Misty tool to stamp the sentiment. You can use any stamp positioning tool. And I'm using this because I'm stamping on a cold press watercolor paper which has a little bit of texture. And I need to stamp that sentiment a few times to have nice coverage of the black ink on the paper. So I'm positioning it along that, over that flash colored stripe onto my background. And before I start stamping, I'm using my anti-static powder tool to apply onto the cardstock or the watercolor paper, and I'm using Raven ink. So I'm stamping several times. So you see the first time it's a little bit kind of faded. So the more time you stamp over it, you get nicer and more kind of intense coverage. Next, I'm using the LDRS Creative clear embossing powder. So I poured over that because we stamped a few times that ink was pretty wet. So I wanted to make sure that I heat set it, and I wanted a little bit more kind of shine to it. So I added the embossing powder. Next, I'm adding that the smaller size sentiment, keeping pocket full off, and I stamped it a couple times with the Raven ink. Next, I pour some clear embossing powder, shook off the excess, and heat set it. So next we'll finish our card. I'm using top folding black note card. I made it using piece of black cardstock measuring 4 1/4 by 11, and I scored it at 5 1/2. And I'll be using some fun foam to adhere that to the card base. This adds a little bit more dimension. It's very easy to mail too. So I'm using some liquid adhesive on the back. I wanted to make sure that it's nicely adhered because the watercolor paper, it has a little bit more rough texture. Next, I'm applying the adhesive on the back and adhering on that black note card. To finish off my card, I'll add few Nuva black drops, and that will finish our card. Before handling the card, I suggest that you let it sit aside for a little bit until those Nuva drops are dry, so they don't get smeared or smushed. So here is the finished card. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to visit the LDRS blog for more details and photos of the picture of the card. As well, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more inspiration and more ideas. Thanks for watching, and see you soon in another video. Bye!